Well, good morning, everyone, or maybe good afternoon or evening, depending where you're joining us from. Welcome back here to the Launchpad. And you're joining us for a Launchpad News live NASA briefing, expected to get underway here in just a couple of minutes. The Artemis I wet dress rehearsal ended yesterday at 7:37 p.m. Eastern Time at T-minus 29 seconds in the countdown. Yesterday's test marked the first time the team fully loaded a Space Launch System rocket's propellant tanks and proceeded into the terminal countdown, where many critical activities occurred in rapid succession. During propellant loading operations earlier in the day, launch controllers encountered a hydrogen leak in the quick disconnect that attaches an umbilical to the tail service mast on the mobile launcher to the rocket's core stage. The NASA teams attempted to fix the leak a number of ways by warming the quick disconnect and then chilling it back down to realign the seal, but none of their efforts were able to fix the issue. Launch controllers then proposed a plan to mask the data associated with the leak that would trigger a hold in the ground launch sequencer or the launch computer in a real launch day scenario. This would allow them to get as far into the countdown as possible. The time required to develop the plan required an extended hold during the countdown activities, but they were able to resume with the final 10 minutes of the count, called terminal count. During the terminal count, teams performed several critical operations that must be accomplished for launching, including switching control from the ground launch sequencer to the automated launch sequencer controlled by the rocket's flight software, an important step that the team wanted to accomplish. NASA is going to host a media briefing here via a teleconference today, June 21st at 11 a.m. Eastern, where they're going to be talking about just everything that happened yesterday. Now, obviously, there's a lot of data that still needs to be reviewed, information that has to be processed, so don't expect we'll have all the answers on how everything went yesterday. Hopefully, we'll hear about what that last flag was at the T-minus 29 second mark, as teams were expecting the countdown all the way to T-minus 9.34 seconds. So we'll have to hopefully get some updates on that. But if it's your first time here, welcome. My name's Zach. I'm the founder and host here at the Launchpad. Here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and you're joining us for our live Launchpad news coverage of today's NASA briefing with an update on yesterday's wet dress rehearsal attempt. And we want to hear from you guys in the poll in the chat. How would you classify the fourth Artemis I wet dress rehearsal? Would you say it's a success, a successful failure, or a failure? They didn't get all the way down. They had quite a few bumps along the way, but they did get pretty close to all the way down in the process that they wanted to do. So, let us know what you think in the poll, and if it's your first time here, let us know in the chat where you're watching from. It's great to have you here. The media briefing should get underway here in about 2-3 minutes, so stay with us right here on the Launchpad as we await a NASA briefing with an update on yesterday's Artemis I wet dress rehearsal.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany Fairley with NASA's Office of Communications. Yesterday, the Artemis I wet dress rehearsal concluded, marking the first time the team fully loaded all of the Space Launch System rockets' propellant tanks and proceeded into the terminal launch countdown. Throughout the rehearsal, teams experienced some issues, but were able to resume operations to continue into the terminal countdown, where they performed several critical operations that must be accomplished for launch. The rehearsal ended at T-minus 29 seconds, and teams proceeded into safing operations and draining the propellant from the tanks. The data will be reviewed, and teams will determine the next steps and the path forward. Here to provide us with an update are Tom Whitmire, Deputy Associate Administrator for Common Exploration Systems Development, NASA Headquarters; Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, Artemis Launch Director, Exploration Ground Systems Program, Kennedy Space Center; John Honeycutt, SLS Program Manager, NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center; Jim Guffrey, Orion Vehicle Integration Manager, NASA's Johnson Space Center; and Mike Serafin, Artemis I Mission Manager, NASA's Headquarters. We'll go ahead and have some opening remarks from our speakers and take your questions. Before we take your questions, I'd like to go ahead and begin with Tom.
All right. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm going to only talk for a few seconds. I've got the honor of sitting right next to Charlie here. I'm going to let her handle all the specific details. But Tiffany, you said it right. I mean, we got through the cryo load of both the core stage and the upper stage. We got into the terminal count. These are really important things that we wanted to see. I try to remind people, we talked about being pieces of a puzzle and a delicate dance. We got through the dance, and we're looking at the pieces of the puzzle to decide what are the pieces that we didn't get, which Charlie's going to talk to you about, but we also got an awful lot of pieces of the puzzle put together, and we have a pretty good idea what the puzzle looks like at this point. So I'm going to let Charlie talk the details, but I want to remind people also that I had the honor of being with John Honeycutt, the program manager for SLS, and with the Green Run test with Dr. Blevins. We saw a lot of the performance of the ALS system, the launch system with the flight software in the vehicle, was able to take us at Stennis and bring us up and do an engine start sequence and do a lot of the things that we actually do for the mission and actually fly us through a mission. And so now we spent a lot of time in the last few weeks here doing the GLS part, the ground part, and seeing how that coordinates with the vehicle. And then we had other testing that we've done previously, like testing in our umbilical. So those are the pieces of the puzzles. We think we've got the dance part down. We've got to chase a leak. And then we're going to see where we're at and all the data that we have from all these different pieces of information that we've collected over a period of time and see what that looks like. But I can't tell you how proud I am. And Jim Bree, my boss, is proud of the work that you and your team did. And everybody, for those that weren't in the LCC, I don't know if they picked it up in the coverage, we actually clapped at the end of this dress rehearsal. And we were clapping for the team. So, Charlie, congratulations. Thank you very much. And I'm going to let you get through the details.
All right. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate those kind words. And hello, everyone. It's good to be back talking to you about our wet dress rehearsal number 4. I want to start out and really echo what Tom said. I'm really proud of the team. We learned some things as part of our prior wet dress attempts, and those lessons were incorporated into our approach yesterday. And the lessons and the things that we learned yesterday will be incorporated into our approach going forward for the next time that we load this vehicle. So yesterday we did have a couple of challenges that we worked our way through, and then a couple of things that we'll be talking about here as part of this brief. But we did have some amazing milestones that we got through, and it was the first time that we had fully loaded the SLS rockets core stage and the ICPS, our upper stage, our interim cryogenic propulsion stage, with both liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. As you recall from prior briefings, that was one of our test objectives that we still had open from our prior attempt, and so we were able to get both stages in replenish. So it was a big milestone for us. During our propellant loading, however, we did discover a hydrogen leak on the SLS core stage, the 4-inch bleed quick disconnect. And after the core stage is in replenish, we do what we call a bleed kickstart, and that is performed to start the LH2 bleed through the core stage engines, and that's for engine conditioning. So when we went into those operations, we did notice that we had a leak in the plate cavity, which is between the flight side and the ground side of the plate in the LH2 TSM. This is different than what we observed in our last wet dress, and we can talk a little bit about the details in a moment. But when we closed the vent valve on the core stage tank, and we put some pressure on the tank, and we're pushing hydrogen through that bleed system and through that bleed QD. We noticed that we had a leak. We took actions to mitigate that and talked about it as a team in terms of our plan to proceed, and got on into the remainder of our loading operations. Again, we got all of our stages into all stages replenished, and then we began to look at some troubleshooting out in the LETF testing, the Launch Equipment Test Facility, where we test a lot of our umbilical plates. We did learn that sometimes you can warm up that QD and reinitiate flow across it, and once it chills down, sometimes you'll see it actually reseat a little bit. We went through and we tried that procedure and saw similar results to the first time that we tried to initiate the bleed flow. So after that, we then went in and began to talk as a team about the milestones ahead of us and the things that we could accomplish while we were in a cryogenic environment. And the team came up with what I think is a great plan to get us into terminal count. We went through very methodically and looked at all of the milestones inside a terminal count, and the couple of things that maybe we wouldn't be able to get, and one of them is in 4 minutes and 40 seconds, we do a verification of the high flow bleed. We realized that we would have to essentially skip that particular verification, but there's a whole lot of other things that you get in terminal count that was worth the benefit of going into that run. And so we developed a plan that allowed us to work through that. We also went over into firing room 3 and tested that against the model and against the emulator, because we wanted to make sure that before we worked through that we were in a good configuration. And when that all checked out, we came back, briefed the team, verified we were ready to proceed, and got down into terminal count. When we got down to about 33 seconds, as you know from some of our other conversations, we do a handoff between the ground launch sequencer and the flight software, and we did expect that once we made that handoff that we would have a cutoff shortly thereafter, because one of the things that the flight software looks for is the indication that the bleed system is in the configuration for launch and that the engines are in fact conditioned. So at that point, we went through the cutoff operations. We recycled as part of that cutoff, got back into a safe configuration, which is also a test objective, and then got into our drain operations after that. So it was a long day for the team, but I think it was a very successful day, and again, accomplished a majority of the objectives that we had not completed in the prior wet dress. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Honeycutt.
Thanks, Charlie. Charlie did a great job with the description of all the things the team had to work through yesterday. It was a long day. The team was on their A game all throughout the whole process yesterday, and I was proud of how the team performed. I saw a boldness in the team that was quite amazing, and it was really great to see us get a full cryo load on the core stage and the upper stage. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim Geffrey.
Thanks, John, and good morning. The Orion program performed very well yesterday throughout the entire launch countdown. Yesterday was a great test. We were able to accomplish our objectives, including the hardware and software on the spacecraft, as well as the ground and flight control teams that were operating throughout. We're really proud of our teams, both across the country as well as in Europe. Orion's an international partnership with the European Space Agency and in 10 different European countries that support it. Overall, the team's ready to proceed to what's ahead, and so I'll turn it over to Mike Serafin, our mission manager.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. It's a real honor to be surrounded by the folks that are on this call today, and their engineering and operations teams. When we had our launch minus 1 day mission management team meeting on Father's Day on Sunday, we reassessed where we were coming into this wet dress rehearsal attempt and resynchronized the team. And coming into that meeting, the team had done a tremendous amount of work to address all of the technical challenges and operational challenges that we had seen in the prior attempts. The vast majority of those were associated with the operations and some of the glitches we had seen previously on the ground side. We had our tanking meeting yesterday morning at 0600, and both that and the L-1 meeting were very quick and clean. We got through those meetings in an hour. We really synchronized the team and focused on the setup for the day, and everybody was ready, and everybody pulled go into the wet dress attempt. After the tanking meeting, I went over to the Launch Control Center and poked my head into the Mission Director Center, where we have our NASA senior executives, and Jim Free, the boss of everybody on this call, the head of the Exploration Systems Development Org. I walk in and say good morning to him, and he tells me, "Nice tie." And I looked, and we had the same pattern, same color tie on. And while I'm not superstitious, I think given the successful cryo loading and successful countdown yesterday, I might coordinate ties in advance with Jim for future big days. If we focus on the objectives that we had coming into this test, not necessarily the script and whether or not we executed per the script, but the objectives, we did a tremendous job of getting through the objectives and getting data to help validate our concept of operations and build our data set for flight rationale. We're going to take a little bit of time to step back and look and see what all of it means moving forward. But we had a very, very successful test yesterday. And the team itself, whether it was our industry partners, whether it was our engineering technical reach-back team, whether it was our operations team or the mission management team, demonstrated tremendous discipline, perseverance, and fortitude. Discipline because they worked methodically through each of the issues. They worked them with the best and the brightest people on the team, regardless of what team or element they were on, and they quickly communicated and effectively communicated up through the operations and mission management team chains. They demonstrated tremendous perseverance because this was the fourth time we had to come back and address the issues. And they demonstrated tremendous fortitude because they faced the issues head on and they didn't shy away from the issues that we saw yesterday. To reiterate what Tom said at the outset of the call, there were a lot of smiles and handshakes in the mission management team area at the end of the day yesterday. We had our Marshall Space Flight Center Director, Jody Singer, come over, and she was handing out hugs and handshakes. We had our Kennedy Space Center Center Director, Janet Petro, come over, and she was handing out handshakes as well. And it was a tremendous sign of progress there. In terms of where we go from here, Artemis I, again, paves the way forward to the moon. It firmly establishes Orion and SLS as our transportation system for crew and cargo for the Artemis program, and yesterday put us on a path for Artemis I. So that's all my comments as well. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. We also have Dr. John Blevins, SLS Chief Engineer from NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, on the line for the question and answer portion of the call, which will now begin. Please remember to stick to one question and identify to whom it is directed. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. You can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can enter *2 to be removed from the queue. Shortly after we conclude, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference online. We'll begin with Jeff Faust of Space News.
I was wondering if you could talk about what objectives you did not reach in the test yesterday, and do you have to complete those objectives before you would be confident with proceeding with the Artemis I launch itself? In other words, would you have to go do another wet dress rehearsal to complete those objectives before you're set to go? Thanks.
All right, well, let's see. I'll start on this one, and then I'll let maybe others on the panel jump in here too. So we have essentially two primary objectives for wet dress rehearsal. The first is to demonstrate the cryogenic loading operations utilizing our ground systems, and that is through all of the phases of the load, which we did yesterday. Now, as part of that, we also look at things like the the loading phases, the recycle, stop, flow, revert. We got a lot of those. We look at drain and safing operations. So there's a lot rolled into that primary objective, but it's essentially get through the different phases of your cryo load using your ground systems and that interaction between your ground and flight systems. So I would say that objective was largely met completely yesterday, maybe less the second terminal count run. The second primary objective is to activate your LC-39 assets, your launch control center, your network, and this includes, when I say network, I mean all of our sister centers, the flight control team, the range. It's all of those day of launch assets into a launch countdown configuration and verify that you can demonstrate your operations and your connectivity and your communications and those aspects, and we have completed that as well. We also have some secondary objectives, which is some of them are related to the interfaces between some of our systems that we share across, like OTV and communications across our centers. Again, that one is complete. One of the ones that we needed to verify, and we got it yesterday, was to go look at the thermal aspects of the vehicle and its performance. And so that was completed yesterday by getting all stages into replenish. And then we have ones associated with our timelines. Our EMI EMC data collection was completed last wet dress, so we did that as well. And then we also demonstrated one of our other minor objectives is to assemble and stage our red crew and our fire rescue crews, and we have done that for a number of our wet dress attempts. And we did that again yesterday. So when you look at overall the 2 primary objectives and then the 5 secondary objectives, there are very few things that are left remaining in those objectives. I don't know if anyone else wants to add.
I'll add a little bit, Charlie and Jeff. I'm sitting here next to Charlie. This is all written down. This is what we said we were going to try to do, and we did it. And so from that perspective, it was a very successful rehearsal. And there's a few items, we have to methodically go through the things that they're still on the plate. There's just a handful of things. We did demonstrate a lot in Green Run with the flight software and its ability to control the vehicle core stage engines. It's the same core stage. It's the same engines that are sitting at the pad right now. And therefore, we'll go through that. We'll ask Mr. Honeycutt and Dr. Blevins to take a look at that. We'll ask our Orion team to take a look at that, and Charlie will take a look at it. We'll write out the things that we still have on the list, but it's a rehearsal, and so I think that's the thing we're going to keep in mind. But we were following Charlie and her team as she went through this, and it was really checking things off one at a time, and it was a lot of the check marks sitting on the paper right now. Dr. Blevins, do you have anything else you want to add to that? Or?
I think both of you covered it very well. I don't want to be biased one way or the other because I know the question's implying what do we do next, but the reality is we're going to go back and look at all the objectives, including the secondary objectives, and there are some that we didn't achieve, and look at the risk of not doing those and what that means to a successful launch day. We will have either a successful launch or a scrub because we have protection in the system already for those objectives that we didn't meet, should they not perform properly on launch day. So they're not really about making the vehicle safer to fly. They're really about can we hit the launch target for the window that's optimum for our lunar mission. And so that's what we're going to have to go look at.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I'm just going to follow up on Jeff's question a little bit. And I think everybody understands you've learned a lot over these 4 tests. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, you could not have launched. And I guess what I'm asking is, Jim Free said last week that he wanted to see a complete test before you press to launch. And I realize you're only missing, a few seconds of that test when you think about it. But, is there any rationale for getting to launch without capturing those final items that you wanted to get down to T-9 and doing the little scrub count thing you were going to do and had to cancel? In other words, do you need to do another perhaps abbreviated test? And finally, is that QD something that can be addressed at the pad? Thanks.
Yeah, Bill, let me hit the first part, and then I'll let Charlie talk about the QD and the pad thing. I have to go back and take a look exactly what Ben talked about last time. I do know that, we have, it's a dress rehearsal. Charlie went through a pretty good list of things that we were actually able to satisfy with the rehearsal. I'd be interested if you had a chance to talk, and you will have a chance to talk to him next time. And I think he'll probably say the same thing I'm about to say, which is we think that we had a really successful rehearsal. We went through a lot of objectives that Charlie just went through with you, and that's what I think would constitute what he was looking for. We know that we'll have a handful of items we need to address during our normal processes, and we do that all the time. And I think we'll take a couple days and get through that, and then we'll make a decision on what's the best path forward. There's relative risk to continuing to exercise the hardware at the pad. That's not necessarily a non-risk situation. There is a lot of benefit from what we've received so far from the rehearsals that we've been through. We need to look at that methodically. That's why we're unable at this point to say specifically absolutely one way or the other. But I'm very encouraged by the amount of objectives. Primary objectives were met. Most of the secondary objectives were met. We have a few things we're going to take a look at. We've got really smart engineers and program managers that are going to help us take a look at that. We'll sit down and get Charlie's counsel, and then we will pick a path forward. Charlie, and then you can answer the QD there, too.
Yeah, I would say, Tom, on the path forward, I mean, you covered it really well. There are a couple of things that we didn't get in terminal count. We'll go look at what those are. We'll go look at, what that means to us, if there are ways to go test those, and then we'll come back and make a recommendation. And so, I'm a big believer in you follow the data, and so we'll go collect the data, and we'll see where the data takes us. And so with regard to the pad, and can we get to this at the pad, we can get to this at the pad if we needed to. We got some folks that are off looking at what that repair scenario would look like, what those ops are, and where it makes sense to go do the work. And so, again, in that theme of we'll let the data take us, we'll go look at what makes sense, and we'll look at that, again, along with the test objectives that are still open or these few things we didn't get, and make a decision.
Thanks, Charlie. Up next, we'll have Irene Kloss with Aviation Week.
Thanks. For Charlie, I think I heard you say this correctly, that you knew you were going to get a cutoff when you switched over from the ground launch sequencer to the flight software before you got to the T-9 seconds because of the bleed system configuration. And is that accurate? And if so, why was the call made to go to a T-9 seconds if that wasn't going to happen?
So originally, our plan was to go to T-minus 9.34 seconds prior to the issue that we encountered with the bleed system. And I'll ask John to add here at the end. But when we decided that we could continue into terminal count knowing that we were unable to complete the engine bleed, that means that we were not going to be at the right thermal conditions when ALS checks that in flight software. And so we realized, or we knew as part of our discussions, that we would get cut off inside a terminal count. There was a little bit of discussion about how deep into terminal count that would happen based on that handoff between the ground launch sequencer and the flight software. We certainly have the capability within the ground launch sequencer to inhibit monitoring on those types of parameters, but we have less capability on the flight side for that. And so we knew that once it sensed that condition that we would have a cutoff. And I don't know, John, if you want to add something specific about the software itself and how that works.
Yeah, Charlie, thanks. I think the real point here, and I heard after the event yesterday that maybe it wasn't communicated outside, that when we made that decision to continue with that bleed QD, that we had a 95% or greater chance that we were going to terminate at the transition to flight software, to the ALS transition. And so we do not and cannot overlook those alarms in the flight software for good reason, and we're always going to keep it that way. And so we can do that on the ground, and as Charlie said several times, we made the decision to bypass some of those alarms in order to get to this transition because of the bigger goals that were down there. There was a lot of talk, and it did get, I guess, pulled out of our deep channels, and people talked about it, I guess, with the comm, and that was, can we control the temperature? This was about the engine start box, you know. We use that bleed to condition those engines, and can we do other means to kind of control that start box, or could we just fall right inside that start box without that bleed? And so there was some hope, certainly on the engineering side, that we could get further because there were some goals that we'd like to achieve. But when we made the decision to continue pretty early in the day after full tanking with the bleed QD, that's when we made the decision that we'd terminate the wet dress essentially at 31 seconds.
Yeah, I guess, and John, I think this is, when we do a dress rehearsal, what we're rehearsing is the ability to get the rocket ready to fly. In other words, we create the situation where ALS is happy, the flight software is happy, and will allow us to launch the vehicle. And so we did a tremendous amount of being able to demonstrate getting the vehicle into the engine box. But as Dr. Blevins mentioned before, at the end of the day, as we proceed forward, every time we fly, there will always be that flight software. It will always be looking for a certain set of conditions. And if we've hit those conditions, we're ready to fly. And if it hasn't, we won't be ready to fly. And that's every launch that we'll ever do with this rocket. That's just how the rocket's set up. So.
Thanks, Tom. Up next, we'll have Philip Sloss with NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. For Charlie, is the vehicle fully detanked and inerted, and is the launch team working on a scrub turnaround practice now? And for, I think, Dr. Blevins, was this leak with the hydrogen overboard bleed valve and the bleed line that was resized after green run? Thanks.
Let's see, in terms of is the vehicle drained, currently we are through drain operations, and we are in work with some of our pulse purge up on the upper stage. So that's where we are in our drain and securing ops.
Philip, as far as the QD, the 4-inch QD, this has been 4 inches, so I'm not aware of any change back there. We did change a QD design and attachment to an 8-inch some years ago, but this is not strictly relevant to that. It's a different QD. Oh, thanks. I just got a tip from Varen here. You're talking about resizing the bleed system on the vehicle. No, it's not related to that.
Thanks, John. Up next, we'll have Eric Berger with Ars Technica.
Yes, hi. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the commentary during Monday's test. I thought Daryl Nail did a great job. For Charlie, for the T-minus 10 minutes to T-minus 29 second part, did you notice anything in the count you didn't expect? It certainly looked smooth from outside the flight control room. And then for Mike, you mentioned doing a tremendous job of hitting your objectives. Can you quantify this, like from rollout through terminal count to rollback, the sort of the whole arc of this enterprise? Have you demonstrated like 99 out of 100, 50 out of 55? Maybe you can't quantify, but I'm just curious, sort of like when you say you've hit most of them, like is it really most of them, or is, whatever? Thanks.
Let's see, I'll take that part inside of terminal count. I will tell you, yesterday during terminal count was extremely smooth. And, we were in our standard configuration, less we had bypassed the bleed as talked earlier, and so we had very few things in the software that were not configured for in our standard configuration, and that was based on, as I said, the issues that we had encountered. But when we came out of T-minus 10 minutes and counting, I fully expected that, again, this is the first time that we have been in a fully cryogenic environment on core stage and upper stage. Terminal count is a very dynamic time and a very time critical. Lots of time critical events that go on in terminal count that are checked both in the flight software and on the ground, and the interaction between the two. And I fully expected that we might have one or two things that we might need to talk in terminal count, and it was extremely smooth. There was nothing to talk about. We counted down and did not have any issues. Saw the APUs APUs start. Saw the turbines spin up, and you saw some of the engine sequence stuff that you would see during terminal count. All of that was nominal. Went through, checked some of the ground systems, and again, I mean, it was a great day and really wonderful to see. I can tell you, having worked on this vehicle for a really long time and done, I can't tell you how many sims, and you watch it run against the emulator, but there's something really special about looking out at the pad and looking at the data in front of you and knowing that you're running with the flight hardware and you're seeing that flight hardware react to the to the commands from the ground and the configuration as you prepare for launch. It was a very special day, and it was extremely smooth.
And Eric, in terms of your question on quantifying the objectives, I would say we're in the 90th percentile in terms of where we need to be overall. And I say that because you cannot look at this test in a vacuum. You need to look at the holistic effort that has gotten us through yesterday. And that includes, bench testing of components, lab testing, whether it's avionics and software testing, some of the solar array wing testing, the engine testing that we do in test stands, whether they're out at White Sands or whether they're at Stennis, or the core stage green run testing, the integrated test and checkout we've done here at the Cape in the vehicle assembly building. And a whole host of other simulations and hardware and integrated avionics and software tests. That puts us, I would say, safely in that 90th percentile. But that said, there are still some open items that we need to go off and look at from a system verification validation standpoint, and cross all the T's and dot all the I's. To say that we're ready from a flight rationale standpoint, and I guess I'll just ask Dr. Blevins or if you have any additional thoughts on that one. But that's kind of my thinking on where we are.
Yeah, I would suggest we're well into that. Again, I'd like to emphasize that the whole point is to have that successful launch day. We've verified the hardware. Once it leaves the pad, it's really about hitting that timing right. I will say it was neat, just following up on Charlie's comments. The beast was alive. It was great seeing the engines breathe, seeing the caboose run, watching the speed control valves. It was a good day.
Yeah, you hold your breath when they go through that. I held my breath for 10 minutes, and they marched straight through. It was smooth. It was really cool.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Kenneth Chang with New York Times.
Hi, thank you. Quick question. So the hydrogen leak that happened yesterday, do you know for certain that didn't happen on the previous wet dress rehearsal, or that could have been there and it just didn't get to the part of countdown where it manifested?
Yeah, so we didn't get that far in WDR number 3, so we have to be in replenish operations on core stage before we initiate that bleed kickstart. And so this was the first time that we had an opportunity to demonstrate that.
Yeah, the bleed kickstart. So this was really interesting, right? We got some data. We know we have a leak we're going to chase, but they upped the pressure a little bit to get the right bleed on the engines to get them pulled down. And we saw that leak occur, and then we lowered the pressure, and the leak went away. So even with the leak, I think this was a really valuable opportunity to better characterize what we might be seeing with the vehicle. So that was very encouraging to actually have the ability to try a couple troubleshooting opportunities and see predicted behavior of the leak. And so this is normally in a shuttle program, we would do this all the time. This was very valuable dress rehearsal, even to better understand what was going on. I don't know if Dr. Blevins, you want to add anything, but it's actually got some interesting insight into what we ought to go take a look at.
Yes, to strictly answer the question, Charlie's got it. We didn't get that far. We don't know if this would have leaked on the last one. Hydrogen is a difficult gas to contain, as we all know. If you've been in this business a while, it has great payoff. It's an incredible performer. But the price you pay is that it's the highest diffusivity molecule on the planet, and so it likes to leak. And so we'll have to look at the hardware when we get back, and when we get back, we'll understand if it would have leaked the first time or if it's just as sealing and we need to look at our process.
Thanks, John. Up next, we'll have John McCarthy with USA Today.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I guess my big question is, what is this going to mean for the launch window? Is the August window still viable at this point, or is that not going to happen?
I think when we get together with you next time, we'll have a better idea and be able to answer your question, John. I don't think we know yet. We need to really sit down and do everything we just talked about, look at the objectives, see what we accomplished, and see what additional work might be required to take a look at the QD. So I would just ask that when we get back together, we'll be able to better answer your question and see where we're at.
Thanks, Tom. Up next, we'll have Isan Ahmed with AFP.
That's okay. My question was just asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we'll have George Dvorsky with Gizmodo.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for doing this. I'm just wondering, any concerns, any flags raised in regards to any of the issues that were detected during the first three wet dresses? Like, are you guys satisfied that all of those various technological or even procedural issues have been resolved? Also wondering, how did Orion, how did that fare during the test? And lastly, when can we reasonably expect to hear next from you guys about what will happen next? Thanks very much.
That's a three-part question. Okay, Jim, how about we start with you? We can talk about Orion.
Sure, we could talk Orion. Orion performed great all the way from the initial power-up down to the T-minus 29 seconds. The ground and flight control teams were able to configure the spacecraft for flight and didn't have any significant anomalies. So hardware and software perform as expected.
Okay, I guess the second question is when we're going to get back together. These folks had a really long day yesterday, just so you all know, and we just drained back. So we're going to give the team an opportunity to take a look at what we got. We talked to Charlie, did a wonderful job talking about all the things we're taking a look at. I suspect it'll be a couple more days, and then we've got to do a very normal process with the right people involved to figure this out. And then we'll get back together. I'm sure it'll be Jim next time. We'll get back together with a couple people and we'll give you an update. But we absolutely will do that. We'll give you an update and we'll provide more information about the path forward. Just hang tight for a couple days and then we'll have it figured out. And what was the
incremental?
Yeah, the other question was prior wet dress attempts. Now I'll take a crack at this. Go look at the issues we had from the prior wet dress attempts. We had GN2 outages from our offsite supplier. Those upgrades were performed. We did a stress test, and that demonstrated that performed without issue yesterday. The check valve for the gaseous helium on the upper stage, that was resolved. We found a rubber piece of FOD. The check valve itself was fine. The stage was fine. The FOD came from the ground, and that was something that was resolved without issue, and obviously worked yesterday just fine. The pad pressurization of the mobile launcher, those fans operated just fine. We did some work on those. The tail service mast unit on the liquid hydrogen side, the area that we looked at, the last attempt where we had a leak, operated just fine. And was there another one?
The other big one is the team learned a lot from a cryo loading operations during the first three wet dresses, and they went off and put together a brilliant strategy to get us to a successful load yesterday.
Yep. So we clearly got into the loading operations and through that as well as detank. So all that was fine. Do you have anything else to add on that, Charlie?
I would just say that this process has been, it's all about incremental learning and incorporating that into your approach going forward. And so we saw some ground, as Mike discussed, right, some issues with the GN2 supply and some of the other things, and those were all corrected and worked great. We didn't see any issues. We had a couple of things with our loading ConOps that we updated, and yesterday during the LO2 and LH2 loading of core stage, which is where we got our experience in wet dress number 3, and we found some things that we needed to go and improve and enhance. And yesterday it was really smooth running through those operations, and it almost seemed, routine. and so I think, to me, that's a testament in learning, incorporating what you learn, and being ready for that next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had talked previously about a lessons learned culture, and this is a sign of a healthy lessons learned culture. You go off, you address it, you roll it back into your plans, and that the evidence from the prior wet dress attempts and the outcome from yesterday is clear evidence of that.
Up next, we'll have Josh Denner with Space.com.
Hi, thank you. I think this is probably for Charlie. Was the valve controller issue in the gaseous nitrogen early yesterday, was that component part of the recent upgrades, or was that part of pre-existing infrastructure?
So it was not part of the upgrades that happened at the offsite plant. This valve that we had an issue with was actually with the controller. It's in our compressor converter facility yard, our valve yard, and we had an issue with one of the legs that supplies GN2, and again, it was the controller associated with that. The team identified it, and we were able to go in and had a spare part and got that part changed out, and it ended up fitting within the existing work that we had as we worked through our timeline to get into tanking. So it was not part of the original problem. It was used in the testing that we did where we flowed GN2 all the way out to the pad and verified the flow, the pressures, and the timelines. The same system was used as part of that test.
This guy's did a great job getting out there and fixing it quickly, too.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Lauren Grush with The Verge.
Hi, thank you so much. I may have missed it earlier after Jeff's question, but I'm wondering if you can be a little more explicit about some of those objectives you didn't actually achieve by not getting down to T-minus 9 seconds. You discussed the objectives that you did meet, but I'm just wondering if you can give a clear example of an objective that wasn't met. Was it simply that scrub recycle attempt, or were there others that you can give a little more details about? Thanks.
So let's see, that primary objective, again, there's two primary objectives. The first one is to demonstrate cryogenic loading operations, including our ground software operation of the vehicle and the ground systems through all phases of cryogenic loading. And I'm kind of just reading that verbatim because that's the objective. That includes loading, recycle, scrub, and drain, and safing operations. And so when you talk about an objective that we didn't meet, there was no whole objective that we didn't meet. You can dissect that objective into pieces, and there are elements within terminal count that we did not get to verify, and that was primarily the bleed flow. That was the element within terminal count. But we did get into terminal count as we described. We had a number of dynamic events with the flight hardware and with the ground software and the flight software that we were able to verify. So there wasn't an objective. I would say that the majority of our objectives were met. There were maybe small pieces within that one primary objective that we came up a little short on.
Yeah, just ask, and Charlie and John can help. We did a bleed flow at Stennis, so we know how to bleed flow through these engines. So the problem is we knew going into this that because of the leak we've got to chase with the QD that we wouldn't get able to get. We knew that up front, and as we went into this part of the terminal count, we knew that would trip us. But I'm confident that the bleed flow works, and we just need to figure out what's going on with the QD. The flight software is great at firing up the engines and taking them through an 8-minute flight simulated there. So we've got a lot of really tremendous data on how this vehicle, this core stage, these engines, all this stuff works. The only thing we didn't, and we intentionally knew we weren't going to get there, was we weren't able to initiate the bleed flow because we were seeing the performance with the QD. John, correct me on that one. I think that's where we're at.
Now, you're right. You're right. On the bleed flow, let me just comment on that. We did use this QD, and this 4-inch QD did the bleed flow and had a successful 8-minute and 20-second firing after conditioning those engines at core green run. So obviously we have used it before, and again, this is part of the price you pay when you have a hydrogen system. Is you're a little bit prone to leak, and you got to fix those things, and we will. And this is the same design. We didn't change anything. from what we used at Green Run, so that's fine. I will go ahead and point out one of the objectives for me, personally, that we didn't reach, since there's that question out there, is we do have some heritage hardware that we're using, some APUs for the booster that I would like to see fire that have hydrazine in them. This is not something that I'm really worried about as a flight risk. Again, if it doesn't perform right, if it doesn't spin up correctly during that last bit of the count, then that would be stopped by software. But it is risk mitigation to a successful launch to see that heritage hardware perform properly. And so, if you're looking for one thing, Tom, that I didn't get back on my list.
John's right that when we were at Stennis, we didn't have the boosters attached to the core stage. And so we demonstrated the flight software could control core stage and the engine start sequence, which is kind of complicated, which was super cool to watch them do that. We didn't have the boosters. These boosters have actually flown before. These, what we call HPUs, are little auxiliary power units that we fire up and we turn them on. And we didn't get far enough down the count to turn them on. So we've seen these actual units turn on before, but it was a little while ago back there. So I've actually seen them turn on.
That's correct.
So we'll get that. Now, if we go into the next opportunity and any flow, if we go to turn on the HPUs and they don't come up, then we would not cut. So I think that is absolutely one of the things we didn't see that comes pretty late in the count. We don't do it early because we don't like to use up a lot of hydrazine, and therefore we turn them on pretty late. And I think that's something we'll look at and see how comfortable we are with that.
Yeah, and really, to follow up on that, Tom, doing the pad ops for the hydrazine was actually the bigger test, and we did all that, of course, in preparation to get to wet dress. So a lot of the objectives getting to launch were met. It's just, to answer the question strictly of what did you miss, that's one thing that I missed.
Yeah, we put 4 gallons of hydrazine in each of the 2 HPUs. They're little units that they use the hydrazine to fire up and create the hydraulic power for the boosters, thrust vector control. And we saw that a lot during the shuttle program. We're pretty comfortable with these. These guys are pretty reliable. These have actually flown before, but we didn't get far enough in the count to see that one opportunity. It's not something you would necessarily rehearse because we've done it a lot before. So that's where I really think the rehearsal was successful. But we did see a leak that we're going to have to go off and take a look at. So.
Yeah, I think you and John covered it. And when we talk about that first big objective, there's a lot rolled in under that. I mean, when you talk about all the phases of loading and terminal count. And so you have to go through and look at all of those things in terminal count and evaluate what you got and what you didn't. So, when I say we largely met that objective, I think we did. But, it's not 100%. There are a few things, and we'll go collect those up and go look at what those things are that we're missing. And there were a couple of them. And one of them was, the other one that we didn't demonstrate yesterday was the 3-minute launch ready hold.
Thanks, Charlie. Up next, we'll have Jim Hillhouse with America Space.
Hi, everybody. Thanks also for doing this. I have another 3-part question, so sorry, but if you decide to do another wet dress rehearsal to get to T-minus 9 seconds, does yesterday's test build your confidence of how smoothly another test would go, and would that make you feel more comfortable to do such a test, to go from cryo loading to 10-minus 9 seconds? And would another test keep you still within the limits of the cryo loads for the vehicle? Thank you.
Let's see, I'll take the first part of that. I would say that anytime you get a chance to do something and you have a chance to learn, incorporate those lessons and do it again, there's undoubtedly benefit in that. So certainly we'll take the lessons from yesterday. We saw the difference between a wet dress 3 and a wet dress 4 for the loading con-ops and how smooth that went for core stage. And we'll take all the data from yesterday and we'll roll that into the next time we load this vehicle. And I'm certain that it'll be just as smooth as the core stage went yesterday. And that's the benefit of learning and incorporating that data going forward. John, I don't know if you wanted to add on the tank cycle.
Yeah, we watch the cycles closely in a couple of ways, but the one that's most important is the cryopressurization cycles we got left, and so right now we've got 19 left, so plenty of margin.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Ken Kramer with Space Up Close.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my question and doing this, and congratulations on great effort and responding so quickly to the actions you had to do yesterday. My question is about the launch window and about whether you prefer, whenever you do launch this, do you guys prefer the longer window or the shorter window? I noticed in the late August the timeline that it's the short mission. I'm sorry, the short mission in the first half and the longer mission in the second half. And can you talk also about how long the launch windows are? Thank you.
Yeah, Ken, we prefer the window that gives us the opportunity to get this mission underway and to start the Artemis manifest. So that we don't have a preference whether we do the short or the long class mission, whether it's the 26-ish day or the 42-ish day mission. We can buy down the uncertainties and the risk to crewed flight through either of those, and we've got plans in place. Regardless of whether it's the short class or long class mission, to get as much done as possible. If we stay out there for a long class mission, we will, in some cases, get more of the objectives done, in the sense that we will be able to repeat and get numerous data takes for things like certifying the optical navigation system and demonstrating some of the power and propulsion and thermal and communication and navigation system capabilities on board the spacecraft. So the more times we can demonstrate those in the flight environment, that just goes towards adding to our data set for future flights and reducing some of that uncertainty. But there's no strong preference. We'll take the opportunity in front of us and we'll go execute the mission. And we've got plans to do either.
Yeah, I was looking at Jim Guthrie. We have this tremendous ESA service module that's part of this mission too, and it's capable of either one. Jim, you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think Mike said it really well, that spending more time in deep space gives us an opportunity to show that the European Space Service Module and the Orion spacecraft as a whole is ready to support these longer and more challenging missions that we have ahead of us for Artemis. But really, it's not a strong preference, and we're going to take the opportunity that presents itself.
Thanks, Jim. Up next, we'll have Philip Sloss with NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks for taking another question. I think this is for Charlie, although maybe it's probably for Cliff Lanham, actually. But if the quick disconnect needs hands-on maintenance, is that going to require opening the engine section back up and setting up the internal work platforms? Thanks.
No, it does not require engine section access.
Thanks, Charlie. And we've got time for one final question, and that'll be Irene Kloss with Aviation Week.
Thanks. Another quick one on the QD. If this had been the launch campaign for Artemis I and you got this hydrogen leak there, presuming you'd fix it at the pad, and do you have an estimate of how much time that would have taken?
So we're in the process. I don't know if we were in our launch campaign. I think we'd have to go look at it and see if we would fix it at the pad. I'd look at it as our process is pretty much the same as what we're going through right now, right? Our team's meeting this afternoon. Whenever we have a launch scrub, we do a launch scrub meeting. And in that launch scrub meeting, we go through and we look at what cut us off for today, what was the problem that we have, what do we need to go fix, can we fix it at the pad, what are the benefits of fixing it at the pad versus fixing it in the VAB, and how do we get back to launch. And so we're having that same kind of discussion today, looking at, what can we go do at the pad? Does it make sense to go do that work at the pad? Does it make sense to do it in the VAB? And then again, taking and balancing that with all of the other data and making a recommendation for the path forward. So if we were in launch campaign, we would have gotten a cutoff yesterday. We are protected in both the ground software and in the flight software, which is a great thing. You know, we're not going to go fly if we can't establish the right environment for the engines and the right engine conditioning, and so we would have had a cutoff based on our LCCs, our launch commit criteria, and based on our flight software, and we would have assessed it and figured out, what we go do and what makes the most sense to go do that. What makes the most sense to go do and how to go accomplish that, and that's what we're doing right now.
Thank you all for joining us today. You can listen to a replay of the teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at nasa.gov/Artemis-1 later this afternoon. To follow along with updates, please go to the Artemis blog at blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis. Thanks again, and that will conclude our call.
And there we go, an update from NASA after the 4th Artemis I wet dress rehearsal. A few updates, lots more research and review needing to be done on the data from yesterday, so of course stay tuned as we do expect another briefing to be held probably in the next couple of days, maybe by the end of the week. But for now, that's going to do it for us here at the Launchpad. Don't forget to get your SLS schematic tees at thelaunchpad.store. Join us over on Discord if you have more questions, and follow us over on Twitter to never miss space news as it happens. But here at the Launchpad, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and this concludes our live coverage of today's NASA briefing as an update following the 4th Artemis I wet dress rehearsal. From TLP Network Studios, this is Zach, signing off. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.